Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Before we start with our today's session, we have an announcement. BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS is conducting a free workshop. This will be conducted by a CSC rank holder. The rank holder will help you understand what is the journey of the UPSC Civil Services. He will also help you in your meticulous planning as well. How do you register? Follow the link given in the description box, give the necessary information, and you would be able to attend this free workshop and get all your issues sorted out. Let's get started and look into the first article. The first article here is speaking about Haryana State Employment of Local Candidates Act. Let us try and understand what are the provisions of this act, what are the issues surrounding this particular act, and way forward when it comes to this particular legislation. First up, let's look into provisions of this act. This is also called as the Haryana Act. According to it, about 75% of the job in the private sector in the Haryana state will be reserved for the local residents. In case there are private companies which are recruiting people and it has a salary less than or equivalent to 30,000 per month, such jobs about 75% should be given to the local residents, that is people from the state of Haryana. The other 25% can be given to people from other states, says this provision. If there are private organizations who are recruiting such people, they will have to use their names, put their details of all these employees on a designated portal initiated by the Haryana government. Now the question is, such reservation, which is 75%, is it violating the constitutional principles, is what is this article all about. While we look into the provisions, yes, it is violating the constitutional principles, says this article. While we also look into this act, the act also makes a mention about some exemptions. What are these exemptions? In case there is a startup and a new information technology enabled services company, such company need not have to go through this 75% reservation. For every other company, there has to be a particular parameter where about 75% of the people are the local residents of Haryana. The other exemptions include short-term employment, farm labor, domestic work, and promotions and transfers within the state. These are given the exemptions, and the state government can also come up with further exemptions as well. But as of now, any other private organization or a company recruiting people whose salary is around 30,000 and less, such people, about 75% in that company, have to be local residents. So this article goes on to say that it violates number of constitutional principles, and let's try and understand what are these constitutional principles. When it comes to Article 19 of 1 of G of the Constitution, what does it speak about? It speaks about practice of any profession or to carry any occupation, trade or business. Look at this word carefully. Let's say there is an individual who has built a company. Let's say there is a company which is operating in Haryana. It is carrying out its occupation, it is carrying on its trade as well as businesses. So this particular person, while conducting this particular business, can recruit people from anywhere in India. But if this act comes into implementation, this will have a restriction on the practice of free occupation, trade and business. How? He would not be able to recruit more than 25%. That is the limitation given under this reservation. And if you look into Article 19 of G, there are some exceptions as well. Such exceptions can be made in the interest of the general public, and there can also be professional and technical qualification. What do we mean by it? Let's say, for example, you're going to one of the IT companies. The IT companies put a technical qualification that you need to have a computer science degree. So you need to be a master's, or you need to have a bachelor's degree, or you need to be a computer science engineer, and you need to have such and such merit criteria. Such merit criteria can be put up by a particular company. That's an exception. Added to this, the government may also impose restrictions when it comes to certain activities and certain area. Let's say, for example, we speak about railway, or let's say, for example, we are speaking about atomic energy. This is restricted to the government operations. So the government may impose qualification restrictions, and the government may keep up certain activities to the government itself. That is the exception given under 19 of 1 of G. So there are no exceptions when it comes to the criteria of other state people moving to another state, seeking for the job opportunities and working and building a trade and a business outlook. So this particular article goes on to say that this proposal made by the Haryana government is in violation of Article 19 of 1 of G, where it is about practice of occupation, trade or business. Let's look into one of the landmark judgments. That happens to be PA Inamdar case. What is this judgment all about? When we look into PA Inamdar case, this was in the year 2005. What happened? There are these private educational institutions. Then we also have the government institutions as well. When it comes to the private individuals, they are not drawing the money from the state governments. The state governments are not investing the money in the private educational institutions. So what did the Supreme Court say? The Supreme Court said that the reservation cannot be enforced on all these private individual agencies. Why? Because they are not getting money from the state government, and as a result we had a constitutional amendment, and that meant that it is not only the government which should be providing reservation, but it is also the private educational institutions. So this amendment only speaks about educational institutions, private educational institutions, and not private agencies. So remember, when it comes to employment, there is no quota reservation that can happen with respect to the private companies, but this reservation is only for the educational purposes, is the major landmark scheme of PA Inamdar case that we have in the Supreme Court. Followed by this, the next important violation of the constitutional principle happens to be Article 15. How? Article 15 speaks about prohibition of discrimination on the grounds of religion, race, caste, sex or place of birth. So we have 5 different notions. So the constitution can make a discrimination on any other ground apart from this. So it means that the state cannot discriminate an individual on the basis of religion, race, caste, sex and place of birth or any of them, but there can be discrimination on any other ground. So we have place of birth where discrimination cannot be done. Now what is the state government doing? The state government comes up with a law and it is discriminating people on the basis of place of birth, because there are people who are born in Haryana, these happen to be the locals, so you're bringing up a reservation on the basis of place of birth, which means Article 15 is also getting violated. Then we have Article 16. Article 16 speaks about equality of opportunities in the matters of public employment. So what does it speak about? It speaks about public employment, but this law is also speaking about private employment as well. Why is the state regulating the private employment where it does not have the power to do so? Even if the state wants to do it, that power is only given to the parliament and not to the state legislature. It is the state legislature which is coming up with the law, the Haryana government which is coming up with the law, but such power is not given to the Haryana government, but such a power is ultimately given to the parliament. So this article goes on to say that the Haryana government in itself did not have the power to bring such a legislation. Such a power was only given to the parliament. How did the Haryana government come up with such a legislation is the second major principle. In fact, the Supreme Court ruled in 2002 that preference given to applicants from a particular region of Rajasthan for appointment as government teachers was unconstitutional. Back in the year 1995, rules in Andhra Pradesh that gave preference to candidates who had studied in Telugu medium was held unconstitutional. Why? Because merit was also given importance to. And in the year 2019, the Allahabad High Court struck down a recruitment notification by the UP Subordinate Service Selection Commission which gave emphasis to those belonging to Uttar Pradesh. Such was also struck down by the Allahabad High Court. So the President says that such notification which gives importance on the basis of domicile, on the basis of local idea, such narratives will not stand the test of law. In fact, the Supreme Court and various High Courts have struck down them in the past as well. So this is another constitutional principle. The third is in reference to the reservation. When we speak about reservation, we have the landmark judgment of the Indira Savni case in 1992. What does it say? It says that reservation should only be about 50%. This was clearly laid out that reservation in a particular state cannot go about 50%. Then in the year 2017, we had the state of Telangana which wanted to breach this 50% quota. Then in the year 2019, we had the state of Rajasthan which also wanted to breach 50% quota. And in the year 2018, the Maharashtra government also came up with a proposal where they wanted to breach the 50% quota, and in fact they also had 50% quota being breached with the reservation being provided for the Marathas. So in such a case, the Supreme Court looked into this particular issue and also said that it cannot breach 50% quota. Even if it is breaching, there has to be a substantial data for the same. There has to be a special and exceptional circumstance. If there is no exceptional circumstance, then this cannot breach 50%, says the Indra Savni case and the recent Supreme Court judgment when it comes to the state of Maharashtra with respect to the Marathas. So what is happening in the state of Haryana? It is having a reservation of about 75% to the locals in that particular state for the recruitment, which means it is violating the reservation quota of 50%. Again, it is violating the constitutional principle. Added to this, if you look into another landmark judgment of Triloki Nath Tiku and others was a state of Jammu and Kashmir from 1996, it says that the Supreme Court has the power of judicial review and can turn down any irrelevant consideration which is an abuse of power by the government as well. Since this particular order is violating all these principles and constitutional fundamental rights, it means it is a violation of the constitutional principles, and ultimately the Supreme Court, as part of the judicial review, can strike down this particular law. As of now, there is a stay that has been initiated by the High Court, but then the state of Haryana has gone to the Supreme Court and it is seeking for the implementation of this particular law. What we also have to remember is that it is not only in this state, there are other states as well. We also have the state of Gujarat, we also have the state of Chhattisgarh, we also have the state of Andhra Pradesh, Maharashtra, Goa, Karnataka, and many other states have also come up with such a proposal. So this particular law should be taken up by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court should give a landmark judgment when it comes to all these issues, as there are these cases in multiple high courts. So since this is a question about constitutional principles, the same will have to be taken up by the Supreme Court, and ultimately justice should be delivered to the people of the country. Apart from these constitutional principles, it also increases the cost for the companies. How? Let's say, for example, if they have to recruit only the local people may ask more salaries as well. But if there are people from other states, they may also be brought into Haryana for a lesser salaries. So this will also help in ease of doing business in the state of Haryana, and ultimately there will be a lot of development in that particular state. But if there is a law imposed, this will increase the cost for the companies, and ultimately ease of doing business will also get disturbed. Added to this, poor states with fewer job opportunities are also trapped within their states. Many people would not now be able to travel to Haryana, and ultimately what we are violating is the very principle of the conception of India. When we speak about India, every single person has a single citizenship, which means he has the right to reside across India. He would be able to find employment opportunities anywhere in India. Now that people would not be able to go to another state, there is violation of livelihood means and mechanisms. So ultimately the Supreme Court should take up such a case and ultimately ensure that justice prevails over this parochial interest of the state government. So the Supreme Court going forward should pronounce a commanding judgment to settle all these issues once and for all, is what is this article all about. Now let's look into the next article. This article says wrong signal. What is the context? We have the Union Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, which had recently banned popular Malayalam news channel. Why? Because it cited security reasons for banning this Malayalam news channel. Let us try and understand what is this issue all about. Before that, we have to understand how are the TV channels regulated in India. When it comes to India, we have the television content, which is regulated by the Cable Television Networks Regulation Act of 1995. According to this law, the central government would be able to control this entire law. It is the central government which will give permission to the media channels and all the channels that are operating in India, and they will also be given certain rules and regulations where all these media news channels and other channels operating in India will have to comply by. So how will this work? Basically, every channel, if they have to go on air, where if they have to conduct their programs and activities, they have to put an application with the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting. So the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting will also issue guidelines on uplinking and downlinking of the television channels. And once this application is made to the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, clearance signal will also have to be given by the Ministry of Home Affairs. After this clearance is given, a particular channel is granted permission by the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting to allow that particular channel to conduct its activities as well as its program. And at the same time, while all this is happening, the center also has the right to suspend the registration of a channel if it is not following the guidelines given by the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting. What is happening in the present situation? Media One happens to be one of the news channel. Back in the year 2011, it got the registration, it got the permission from the Government of India for conducting its activities. So when registration is given by the Government of India, permission is granted by them, this will be valid for a period of 10 years. So the Media One, which happens to be a Malayalam news channel, got permission back in the year September 2011. So the registration is valid for 10 years. So ideally, when should the renewal process happen? It should happen in the year September 2021. So as per this, they initiate the proceedings. They ask the central government for the renewal. They file an application in May 2021. The Ministry of Home Affairs has to give the clearance as we just discussed, but the Ministry of Home Affairs is not happy as this particular news channel, according to the Ministry of Home Affairs, felt that they have violated some of the security concerns and guidelines in the past. So as a result, what happens? We have the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, which has now suspended this particular news channel, citing security reasons. The Ministry of Home Affairs did not give permission to it, and as a result, the Ministry of Information has suspended this particular channel. So this channel would not be able to air its programs, it will not be able to air its news channel, and ultimately they will not be able to telecast any of the programs. So what does this channel do? It goes and appears before the High Court seeking relief against the government's action. So we have the High Court of Kerala, which looks into this particular issue. Now the High Court of Kerala looks into this particular issue and ultimately upholds the government's decision to ban the news channel. So the government had banned the news channel. The High Court looks into this particular case and uphold the same decision of the Government of India. Now the question is, why did the High Court take up such a decision? When it comes to the High Court, what did the High Court believe? The High Court goes on to say that yes, media freedom is very important. We have the Supreme Court of India in number of landmark judgments has given importance to the press freedom. It has also held that press freedom is an invaluable and sacred right as enshrined in the Constitution of India, and for the effective functioning of the democracy, the fourth pillar of the democracy happens to be the media. So the High Court of Kerala says that it is very important that the media freedom is upheld. However, when you speak about media freedom, you also have to take into picture exemptions given under Article 19 of 2. What does Article 19 of 2 says? That if there is the media freedom, which is happening in the fourth pillar of the democracy, where they are able to give information to the people, where there is right to information which is delivered to the people, they also have to keep in picture the national security aspects as well. In case there is a media channel, if there is a channel which violates the security of the state, then the central government has every right to regulate so and also cancel the license and also ask that particular channel to suspend its activities. So we have the High Court of Kerala, which looks into the arguments made by the central government, arguments made by the media house, and ultimately goes in favor of the central government. Why does it favor the central government? That is also because when it comes to the national security, what happens? It is the executive which has all the information. The police officers are under the control of the executive. We have the RAW, the intelligence bureau, the intelligence inputs all come up to the executive. So basically, because the executive, because the government has access to all these intelligence inputs, according to the Kerala High Court, which happens to be a single judge bench, they go on to say that it is because the national security is one of the important aspects. It is about the sovereignty and integrity of the country. If that is getting violated in terms of media freedom, the central government would be able to impose reasonable restrictions, says the Kerala High Court. So basically, the central government says in a situation of national security, a party cannot insist on strict observance of the principles of natural justice. Why does this come into picture? That is because in the present situation, when asked with the central government why did they suspend the license, why were they not given permission, no reasons were given by the government of India. When the other party is not heard, it also means that there is a violation of the natural justice principle. What is the natural justice principle? If there are two parties, both the parties will have to be heard. Both the parties' merits will also have to be heard as well. But in the present situation, the government of India's viewpoints were taken by the High Court, but the other side did not know why was there a suspension of the license. Ultimately, it means there is a violation of the natural justice principle. But the central government says that since this is a question about the security of the country, in such a situation, the other party need not have to know what is the security threat, says the government. The same has also been upheld by the High Court. This is where the author goes on to say violates number of constitutional principles. What are these constitutional principles? When we speak about barring a particular company or a media house from telecasting its programs, what does it mean? There are a number of people who are working in this particular channel. It is also a source of profession for them. So this means it is also equivalent to right to livelihood as well. If they are not heard, if the principle of natural justice is not catered to, such people's right to livelihood will also be disturbed as well. So the first violation, because this particular party is not being heard in the High Court and the central government is not citing the reasons why there is an issue, it means that number of people might lose their jobs, they might not get their salaries, and ultimately right to livelihood is getting violated. Added to this, we also know for the fact that press freedom is one of the important rights that is guaranteed under Article 19. This will also send a chilling effect to multiple other media outlets as well, that if you're not subscribing to the values of the central government, your licenses will be cancelled. It also means that you have to subscribe to the value system of the central government. If you do not do so, if you do not question, then either your channel will be suspended temporarily or it might also be cancelled the license as well. So this might send a chilling effect, says the author in this particular article. Thereby, this will ultimately hit the fourth pillar of the democracy, the media, and ultimately right to information, which all of us are guaranteed in democracy, will not be delivered to the people in the country. So on one side, there is violation of right to livelihood, there is violation to the press media, there is violation to the press freedom, and finally, people who should know what are the activities that is happening, that is also getting violated as well. And finally, any restriction imposed on the fundamental rights must not only be reasonable, but it should also pass the test of proportionality. Did the central government have any other options? If they had the option which was of least interference, such could have been awarded by the central government, ultimately violating all these constitutional principles. In fact, in the year 2020, in the Anuradha Basin versus the Union of India, the Supreme Court also held that there was no absolute immunity for the national security grounds, which means that if the central government says that national security is one of the important parameters where restrictions can be imposed, the judicial review can be taken up, says Anuradha Basin versus the Union of India. In fact, in the Pegasus spyware case as well, it also went on to say that mere invocation of national security won't render the court a mute spectator, which means the court can actively participate, can question the government about this whole national security narrative. This government cannot give this word national security and escape and impose its whims, says the Supreme Court of India. But in this particular case, the Kerala High Court went on to say that the Pegasus spyware issue cannot be used in the present situation, as Pegasus spyware was more about right to privacy and this is more to do with national security, says the High Court of Kerala. So what will be the impact of this particular judgment? So the impact will be, in the past there have been temporary holds and in the past there have been temporary bans placed on the news channels. Let's say for example NDTV, or let's say for example Asianet News TV, all these channels had a temporary ban, but for the first time a channel's license has been revoked altogether, which means it can have a chilling effect on the press freedom going forward. What is the future course of action that this Malayalam news channel has? It has appealed to the division bench. This was a judgment given by a single judge bench. Now they have appealed with the division bench, where there will be two judges who will be giving a judgment. If they are not happy with this judgment as well, they can also appeal to the Supreme Court of India. So basically the constitutional courts, which are nothing but the high courts as well as the Supreme Courts, they, being the watchful guardians of the fundamental rights, must ask questions to the state, the government, especially when it comes to the cases of national security, is what is this article all about. Now let's look into the next article. This article says creating a sun in laboratory. The article here is speaking about thermonuclear fusion and it also speaks about power generation as well. When it comes to the power plants in India, anywhere in the country, what happens? Power plants usually generate electricity. How? By converting the mechanical power, such as the rotation of turbine, into the electric power. So what happens? There is conversion of the mechanical power into the electric power. Then we also have number of coal fired stations as well. What happens? The combustion of the coal turns water into steam and the steam in turn drives the turbine generators to produce electricity. So in all these cases, what we are able to do is generate electricity. So what are the different power plants that we have? We have different types of fuels. It can be the fossil fuels. It can also be because of the nuclear fission process. It can also be because of the renewable energy sources like hydro. Now imagine we already have the nuclear energy which is happening from the nuclear fission. But what if nuclear fusion can be also used? In the present situation, we have the nuclear fusion process that is currently taking place in multiple stars. The nuclear fusion process is the process by which the sun produces the heat and light, could provide an almost limited source of energy with no damage from the greenhouse gases or acid rain. Since the nuclear fusion process, which is used in the sun and also in other stars, if such process and instrument can be created, what would happen? We would have endless amount of energy, we would have huge amount of electricity generation. So this article currently goes on to say that if we are able to explore this new idea of thermonuclear fusion, where number of experiments are being conducted, what we will have is enormous amount of power generation with minimal wastage. Let us try and understand what is this article all about. When it comes to this article, it makes a mention of what is called as tokamak. What is tokamak? This happens to be an instrument as shown in this particular picture. So the term tokamak comes from a Russian acronym that stands for toroidal chamber with magnetic coils. How does this work? If you look into this apparatus, what it requires is the fuel supply. What are the fuel that we have? We have the deuterium, which is nothing but the hydrogen ion, easily derived from water. Supplies would last indefinitely. Then we also have tritium, where it is nothing but hydrogen ion created in the fusion process. Then we also have lithium, which is the metal needed for the production of tritium, known reserves of at least for 1000 years. These are the fuels that will be used in this particular process. Now how will this tokamak work? Basically, inside this particular equipment, under the influence of extreme heat and pressure, gaseous hydrogen fuel that we just spoke of becomes a plasma. So what would happen? The gaseous hydrogen fuel will be converted into plasma. What is the plasma? Plasma is nothing but a hot electrically charged gas in a star. In a fusion device, the plasmas provide the environment in which light elements can fuse and ultimately give us the energy. So basically this plasma will have to be controlled. It should not touch any of the other equipment. So how do we shield it? How do we protect it? What we have is the magnet. So basically we have these massive magnetic coils which are placed around the vessels, and this will ultimately confine the hot plasma away from the vessel walls as well. So basically what we will have is the hydrogen fuel which will be converted into plasma, which is nothing but a hot electrically charged gas. So basically this article here goes on to speak about thermonuclear fusion, where hydrogen atoms combine to produce the helium just like how it is in the sun, and ultimately it will release immense of energy, says this article. Such an experiment was conducted in China, where China's experimental advanced superconducting tokamak sustained the plasma at 70 million degrees Celsius for about 1056 seconds in January 2022. In February 2022, the joint European Torus fusion experiment in Oxfordshire, UK produced about 59 megajoules of energy from the thermonuclear fusion. And these two experiments, along with multiple other experiments conducted by many countries world over, are rehearsals for the upcoming International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor. This happens to be a global experiment to generate about 500 megawatts of power by fusing hydrogen atoms into helium atoms by the year 2025. So basically multiple countries are conducting their own experiments. These are the rehearsal process. Scientific community will get exposure to it, and ultimately all these people will come together on a global scale in the International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor, and ultimately what we would have is a new generation of power in the form of fusion process. What are the advantages of such a fusion process? Basically fusion reactors like the tokamaks do not pose dangers, as the radioactive leak is comparatively less. Even if there is radioactive waste, it can be handled as well, and at the same time we would be able to generate enormous amount of electricity, and the non-polluting helium is one of the byproduct. So the byproduct, the greenhouse gases, will be comparatively less when it comes to the fusion process. When it comes to India, we have the Institute for Plasma Research in Gandhinagar and the Hot Plasma Project at Saha Institute of Nuclear Physics, Kolkata, which has taken the lead in the nuclear fusion research in India. So we have multiple countries working on the nuclear fusion, the scientific community getting exposed to it, and in the near future they all come together to conduct this international thermonuclear experimental reactor. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says RBI retains status quo to spur the growth. The Monetary Policy Committee of the Reserve Bank of India has left the key policy rates unchanged and has retained the accommodative policy stance to support the uneven economic recovery in the wake of the COVID-19. So this article currently goes on to speak about the repo rate. It also speaks about the reverse repo rate, and it also speaks about the interest rates as well and how it has remained unchanged. What is the repo rate? The rate at which the Reserve Bank of India lends money to other banks is what is called as repo rate. This is currently unchanged at about 4%. Then we also have the reverse repo rate. What is the reverse repo rate? It is the rate at which RBI borrows from other banks. So basically it sucks the capital from the other banks, and this is at about 3.35%. So this has remained unchanged. So this article goes on to say that in spite of the inflation, RBI has gone by the accommodative stance, whereby they want growth and development in the market so that they can prevent an end to the issues of COVID-19. What is this article all about? Why has the RBI taken such a stand? What is happening at the international level will all be explained in our economy this week. Now let's look into the next article. This article says, is the institution of governor subverting the federal structure? We have discussed about this article number of times in the past 1 to 2 weeks, so we would not be discussing this article. Now let's look into the mains practice question. A law on job quota for locals not only violate fundamental rights, it also breaches the basic structure of the constitution. Do you agree? justify. Second question, allowing the state to raise the national security ground to restrict media freedom without any checks can lead to dangerous consequences. Examine. So please write all your answers on the comment section. Peer review. Do give positive feedback to your friends' answers. In case you wish to upload an image of your answer, you can also visit our website and also upload an image for the same questions as well. So this is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.